Biggest fish of them all, Caitlin Clark. Take a look here. This is crazy. It is going down, y'all. It's going down like Young Jock. I keep trying to tell you. Sparks agree to part ways with general manager Reagan Pebley. The LA Sparks have agreed to part ways with general manager effective today. I want to get into the new ownership before I even get to what coach had to say. Okay. Now, this new ownership group came in and they are looking to make major moves, okay?
The WNBA just delivered one of the most chaotic, controversial, and genuinely fascinating weeks in the league's recent history. And if you blinked, you might have missed exactly how much changed in a very short period of time. A player averaging 8 points a game just got her own Adidas shoe, and the internet did not handle it gracefully. Thousands of comments flooded in, debates exploded across every platform, and what started as a product announcement turned into a full cultural flashpoint that exposed something much deeper than a disagreement about basketball statistics. At the same time, the Los Angeles Sparks quietly made one of the most significant organizational moves of their recent history, parting ways with their general manager, and signaling that new ownership is done playing it safe. The Walter Group is not here to maintain the status quo, and the moves being made behind the scenes in Los Angeles suggest that something much larger is being built. And sitting right in the middle of all of it is Caitlin Clark, whose contract situation, relationship with her coaching staff, and long-term future with the Indiana Fever has become one of the most debated topics in women's sports. Nobody in Indiana wants to answer the question directly, but the question is getting louder by the day. 3 stories, one bigger picture. And by the end of this, you will see exactly how they all connect. There is a version of Sophie Cunningham's story that gets told in highlight reels and viral clips, and then there is the longer version, the one that actually explains how a third-round draft pick from Missouri became one of the most commercially valuable athletes in women's basketball. The longer version is a lot more interesting. She grew up in Columbia, Missouri, in a household where basketball was not a hobby, it was a way of life. Her father, Carl Cunningham, played college basketball, and that foundation shaped everything about how Sophie approached the game from an early age. She was not the most recruited player coming out of high school. She was not handed anything based on projection or potential, and she did not arrive at the University of Missouri with the kind of fanfare that follows 5-star prospects. What she arrived with was a mentality that proved very difficult to coach against and even more difficult to contain. Over 4 years at Missouri, she became one of the most decorated players in the program's history. She was a consistent SEC performer, known for toughness on both ends of the floor, a reliable 3-point stroke, and a leadership presence that went beyond statistics. Coaches talk about players who make winning plays, the kind that do not always show up on the box score, but that changed the outcome of games, and Cunningham was that player throughout her college career. By the time she was done in Columbia, she had built a reputation as someone who competed at a different level emotionally than most of the people around her. The 2019 WNBA draft did not treat her like a star. She went in the 3rd round, which in practical terms means you are expected to fight for a roster spot rather than walk into one. The Phoenix Mercury gave her that opportunity, and she took full advantage of it. Over 6 seasons in Phoenix, she carved out a role as a reliable rotation player, a tough defender, a solid 3-point shooter, and the kind of teammate who showed up in the moments that mattered. She was not the player everyone was talking about at the end of those 6 seasons, but she was the player coaches trusted when the game got difficult. The move to the Indiana Fever in 2024 was the decision that quietly changed the trajectory of everything. At the time, it looked like a lateral move, a veteran player joining a rebuilding franchise with a generational rookie coming in. In hindsight, it was the moment that put Sophie Cunningham on a path toward becoming one of the most recognizable athletes in women's sports. Not because Indiana handed her anything, but because the environment she walked into gave her visibility she had never had before, and she used every second of it. Off the court, people who know Cunningham describe her in remarkably consistent terms: fiercely competitive, deeply loyal to her teammates, and genuinely unbothered by outside noise in a way that does not feel performed. A lot of athletes claim they do not care what people think. Cunningham actually behaves like someone who does not care what people think, and there is a significant difference between those two things. She has been in the WNBA since 2019. She has dealt with roster changes, coaching changes, market changes, and every variety of professional uncertainty that comes with being a mid-tier draft pick trying to build a career in a league that does not guarantee anyone longevity. She came through all of it with her personality completely intact. That personality, competitive, loyal, loud, and utterly unbothered, is not just a character trait. It turned out to be a brand. And Adidas, a company that has been watching her since 2022 when she switched from Nike and began organically promoting their products on national television and her own social channels, had been paying very close attention. The third-round pick was building something. It just took one specific moment for the rest of the world to notice. There are moments in sports that exist purely as sports moments, exciting inside the context of the game and mostly forgotten by the following week. And then there are moments that break through the membrane of the sport entirely and land in the broader cultural conversation in a way that nobody planned and nobody could have manufactured. What happened on June 22, 2026 was emphatically the second kind. The Indiana Fever were playing the Connecticut Sun, and the game had the kind of edge that playoff-adjacent matchups tend to carry when both teams know the standings are tight and every possession matters. Johnny Carrington got into a confrontation with Caitlin Clark, and the situation escalated quickly. For anyone who had been following the WNBA that season, the tension between those two players was not new. It had been building across multiple games and had already generated its share of commentary and debate online. What was new was what happened next. Sophie Cunningham stepped in immediately. No hesitation, no calculation, just the instinctive response of someone whose loyalty to her teammate runs deeper than any concern about personal consequence. That is the kind of player she is, and that is the kind of teammate she has always been. She stepped between the situation and Caitlin Clark, and then the official stepped in and told her to stop pointing. She pointed for 22 more seconds. 22 full seconds of sustained, deliberate, completely unbothered pointing, while the official stood there telling her to stop, and the entire arena reacted around her. Staff eventually had to physically redirect her toward the bench. Both players received technical fouls, the game continued, and Sophie Cunningham walked to the bench with the same expression she would have worn if nothing unusual had happened at all. The clip hit the internet within minutes, and it did not slow down for days. It reached the WWE, where commentators and personalities picked it up and ran with it. It reached political circles, with figures referencing it in contexts that had nothing to do with basketball. It reportedly generated conversation at the White House level, which for a WNBA moment is genuinely extraordinary. Fans began overlaying the clip with dramatic movie scenes, with opera music, with action sequences, with every variety of creative remix that the internet produces when it finds something it cannot look away from. What made the clip so powerful was not the confrontation itself. Confrontations happen in basketball all the time. What made it impossible to ignore was the sustained nature of it. The 22 seconds of complete composure while pointing directly at an official who was telling her to stop. The total absence of any indication that she was considering backing down, and the way the whole thing captured something essential about who Sophie Cunningham actually is as a person and competitor. She did not manufacture that moment. She did not calculate it. She did not look at a camera or play to the crowd or think about how it would look on social media. She just did what she always does, which is compete without flinching and stand by her teammate without apology. The fact that it became a cultural phenomenon is a reflection of how rare that kind of authentic, unfiltered competitive instinct looks in an era where so much of what athletes present publicly is carefully managed and strategically positioned. Within days, she went from being a respected rotation player that serious WNBA fans knew well to one of the most recognizable athletes in women's sports. Sports media that had never devoted significant coverage to Sophie Cunningham was now running full segments on her. Casual fans who had never watched a WNBA game were searching her name. The clip spread far beyond the basketball audience and landed in spaces that women's basketball had historically struggled to reach. And here is what is important to understand about that moment in the context of everything that came after it. It was not a one-day story. The cultural footprint of that 22-second clip continued to grow for weeks, and by the time Google compiled its annual year in search data, the numbers told a story that nobody in the shoe industry was going to ignore. The moment was real, the response was real, and the commercial implications were about to become very real as well. Because while the internet was busy remixing the clip and debating what it meant, Adidas was doing something more concrete. They were looking at their roster, looking at the data, and making a decision. When Adidas sat down to decide who they were going to build a shoe around, they were not operating on gut feeling or personal preference. They were looking at numbers, and the numbers were telling a very specific story about which WNBA player had built the most significant cultural footprint in the United States over the previous 12 months. In December 2025, Google released its annual year in search report, the definitive public record of what Americans were actually searching for across the entire calendar year. The list of the 10 most searched athletes in the United States is always a revealing document, a snapshot of who captured public attention beyond their sport and crossed over into the broader cultural mainstream. Number 7 on that list was Sophie Cunningham. She was the only female athlete in the entire top 10. Read that again, because it deserves to sit for a moment. In a country with thousands of professional female athletes across dozens of sports, Sophie Cunningham, a rotation player averaging 8 points per game for the Indiana Fever, was the most searched female athlete in the United States on Google for 2025. She had surpassed Caitlin Clark among female athletes in raw search volume, which, given Clark's own extraordinary commercial profile, is a data point that would have made any brand executive stop and take notice immediately. The social media picture was equally compelling. Cunningham sat in the top 5 among all WNBA players in followers across every major platform. These were not purchased followers or the result of a single viral moment pushing a number temporarily higher. This was sustained, organic audience growth built across months of consistent presence, personality, and authentic engagement, with a fanbase that had decided she was someone worth following closely. The relationship with Adidas was not new either, which matters enormously in the context of this deal. Cunningham switched from Nike to Adidas back in 2022, and from that point forward, she had been one of the brand's most visible and authentic advocates. She wore their products on national television. She promoted them on her own social media without it feeling like a transaction. She talked about the brand in interviews in the way someone talks about something they actually believe in rather than something they are contractually obligated to mention. That kind of organic, sustained brand alignment is genuinely rare and genuinely valuable. Shoe companies spend enormous resources trying to create the appearance of authentic connection between their products and the athletes who wear them. With Cunningham, that connection was already there and had been building for 3 years before the shoe announcement. Adidas did not have to manufacture a story around her. The story was already written. The last WNBA player to receive this level of investment and attention from Adidas was Candace Parker, one of the greatest players in the history of the league. Cunningham becoming the first player in years to receive comparable treatment from the brand is not a small detail buried in the fine print. It is a significant statement about where Adidas sees the commercial landscape of women's basketball moving and who they believe is best positioned to lead them into that landscape. The critics who responded to the shoe announcement with statistics about points per game missed the entire point of how modern sports marketing actually operates. Shoe companies are not rewarding past performance with a trophy. They are making calculated bets on future commercial return, and those bets are driven by audience size, cultural presence, brand alignment, and the ability of an athlete to move product in a market that is paying attention. By every one of those measures, Sophie Cunningham was the correct choice, and the data to support that choice had been building for the better part of 3 years. Adidas looked at the numbers, they looked at the cultural moment, They looked at a 3-year organic partnership that had already proven its value, and they made their move. The only thing left was to build a shoe worthy of the athlete. The shoe itself is genuinely worth talking about before getting into the storm that followed its announcement, because the design tells you something about how seriously Adidas took this collaboration and how clearly they understood who Sophie Cunningham is as a personality and a brand. The colorway is built on a hot pink to white gradient that runs from the toe toward the heel, a bold opening statement that does not apologize for itself and does not ask permission to take up space. Light blue mesh panels run through the sides and show up again in the 3 stripes branding on the tongue and heel, giving the shoe a layered visual identity that rewards a second look. Orange accent hits on the midsole and outsole provide contrast and prevent the overall palette from feeling one-dimensional. Her name is on it, her design input shaped it, and the finished product looks exactly like something Sophie Cunningham would wear, loud, confident, and completely unbothered by whether it is the safe choice. It drops July 24th. It is priced at $120. It is a player-exclusive colorway of the Adidas Crazy IQ Energy, and it represents something historically significant for the brand's relationship with the WNBA. Adidas has not had a player at this level of signature treatment since Candace Parker, and Cunningham becoming the first player in years to receive it marks a genuine shift in how the brand is approaching investment in women's basketball. The backlash started within hours of the announcement, and it came in loud. The most common and most repeated argument centered on her career statistics: 8 points per game, 2.8 rebounds, 1.4 assists across her entire WNBA career. Critics framed these numbers as the definitive argument against her deserving a signature-level shoe, and the argument spread quickly across comment sections, X threads, and sports talk platforms. Names got invoked repeatedly. Aja Wilson, arguably the best player in the league by almost any statistical measure. Sabrina Ionescu, one of the most skilled guards in the game. Angel Reese, whose rookie season generated enormous commercial attention. Diana Taurasi, a living legend of the sport. The argument being made was that players with significantly better statistical profiles had not received this kind of treatment from Adidas, and that Cunningham's shoe was therefore unjust. But reading the comment sections and threads carefully, something became apparent. A significant portion of the backlash was not purely about basketball statistics, and the language being used was not purely the language of sports debate. There was a specific current running through the criticism that connected to a broader 2-year conversation in the WNBA about race, visibility, and who gets celebrated and marketed in the league. This is not a comfortable conversation, but it is a real one, and it deserves to be addressed directly rather than glossed over. The question of why certain players receive commercial opportunities while others with comparable or superior on-court credentials do not is a legitimate question with a complicated answer that involves audience demographics, cultural positioning, brand strategy, and yes, in some cases, racial dynamics that the league itself has acknowledged publicly. Caitlin Clark spoke about it directly, stating that racism coming from within her own fan base was not acceptable and making clear that she did not endorse the behavior of fans who directed racial hostility at her teammates or opponents. Sue Bird went further, pointing out that fans had been directing racist behavior toward WNBA players long before Clark arrived in the league, and that Clark was being used as a pawn in a cultural war that she did not create and did not want to be part of. That context matters when evaluating the backlash against Cunningham's shoe. Some of the criticism is a legitimate sports marketing debate about priorities and visibility in a league that has historically struggled to get all of its best players the commercial recognition they deserve. That conversation is worth having. But a meaningful portion of what flooded the comment sections was operating from a different place entirely, and using the word undeserving in a way that carried freight well beyond basketball statistics. Sophie Cunningham's response to the entire situation was 3 words, delivered after a Fever win earlier this season. Let me live. Clean, direct, and completely characteristic of someone who has spent years in professional basketball learning that you cannot control what the internet decides to do with your name, but you can absolutely control how much of your energy you give it. The stats argument, separated from everything else, still does not hold up analytically. Shoe companies have never operated as a reward system for career statistical achievement. Player exclusives and signature deals exist for athletes who have cultural presence, commercial appeal, and brand alignment, not for the player with the best points per rebounds ratio. Michael Jordan was not the statistically dominant force at the time of his original Nike deal that he later became. The deal was made on the basis of who he was becoming and what audience he was drawing. The same logic applies here, and the data supporting Cunningham's commercial appeal is not ambiguous. The Fever fan base, and the broader audience that has formed around the Clark era in Indiana, is one of the most commercially active groups in women's sports. They move attendance numbers, they buy merchandise, and they engage with brands connected to players they follow. A $120 Adidas shoe connected to a genuine cultural moment, designed with Sophie Cunningham's actual input, and dropping into a market that has been paying close attention to her for over a year, is a product with serious commercial legs. The critics are going to get the receipt on July 24th. While Sophie Cunningham's shoe was generating arguments across every corner of the sports internet, something quieter but potentially more consequential was happening on the other side of the country. The Los Angeles Sparks made an organizational move that flew somewhat under the radar, given everything else happening in the league at the same time. But its implications deserve serious attention from anyone trying to understand where the WNBA's power structure is heading. The Sparks officially parted ways with general manager Reagan Pebley, effective immediately. Pebley had been a significant figure in the Sparks organization, and her departure was not a minor personnel shuffle. This was a structural change at the top of a franchise that has spent the last several years trying to find its footing in a league that has grown commercially and competitively around it, while the Sparks themselves struggled to maintain relevance. The timing of the move matters as much as the move itself. The LA Sparks were acquired by the Walter Group, which also has significant involvement with the Los Angeles Lakers organization, and the new ownership arrived with a clear message: business as usual is not the plan. Organizations connected to the Lakers tend to operate with a particular understanding of how major market sports franchises need to project ambition and commercial aggression. And the Walter Group's increasingly hands-on approach to the Sparks this season has been noted by people inside and outside the organization. ESPN's Ramona Shelburne, one of the most credible and well-sourced reporters covering the NBA and WNBA landscape in Los Angeles, confirmed that the Sparks' ownership has become significantly more involved with the franchise this season, consistent with their approach to the Lakers. Her characterization of the Pebley departure was direct and illuminating. "This is more of an organizational shift than anything specific," she reported. That framing is important. This was not about one person making one decision that led to a consequence. This was about a new ownership group deciding that the organizational architecture of the franchise needed to be rebuilt from the top down to match the ambitions they arrived with. Head coach Lynn Roberts acknowledged the pressure openly in the aftermath of the announcement. She did not pretend it away or offer the kind of carefully managed response that suggests someone who is comfortable with their position. She knows the reality of coaching for an ownership group that is actively reshaping the franchise around a vision that has not yet been fully revealed publicly. There are no guarantees in that environment, and Roberts is experienced enough to understand exactly what that means. Cameron Brink's name has entered this conversation as well, and for reasons that go beyond her status as an injured player working her way back to the court. Brink is a known friend of Caitlin Clark, a connection that has not gone unnoticed in the context of a Los Angeles franchise that is rebuilding aggressively and looking for a centerpiece around which to construct a new identity. The connection is real. What, if anything, the Sparks ownership intends to do with it remains in the category of speculation rather than confirmed strategy. What is not speculation is the broader picture of what Los Angeles represents as a market in the current WNBA landscape. The Sparks play in the second largest media market in the country. They have access to one of the wealthiest and most commercially active sports audiences in the world. They play in an arena connected to the Lakers' infrastructure, which means access to resources, relationships, and promotional platforms that most WNBA franchises cannot match. In a league that is actively growing its commercial footprint and attracting serious investment for the first time in its history, Los Angeles should be one of the dominant franchises both on the court and in terms of market presence. The gap between what the Sparks should be and what they have been recently is precisely what the Walter Group appears to be trying to close. The firing of Reagan Pebley was not an ending. It was the first visible sign of a rebuilding process that appears to be moving with genuine urgency. The question of where that process leads and who the Sparks identify as the athlete around whom they build their new identity is one of the more interesting open questions in the league right now. Let's be clear about something before going any further into this section, because clarity matters when the topic is as widely speculated about and as frequently distorted as Caitlin Clark's future with the Indiana Fever. There is no confirmed offer from the Los Angeles Sparks or any other franchise. There is no verified report from a credible source stating that Clark has agreed to leave Indiana or accepted terms from any West Coast organization. Anyone presenting those claims as documented fact is presenting fiction as news, and that distinction is important. What is real, what is confirmed, and what is genuinely worth examining is the set of circumstances surrounding Caitlin Clark's situation in Indiana that have led so many analysts, commentators, and informed observers to openly question whether her long-term future with the Fever is as certain as the organization might prefer it to appear. Clark is approaching a contract decision point that will be one of the most significant moments in the WNBA's recent history, regardless of which direction it goes. Kelsey Mitchell is also approaching the end of her contract with Indiana, which means the franchise faces a set of decisions simultaneously that will define what they are actually building and for whom. Multiple analysts with credible track records of WNBA coverage have made the argument publicly that the Fever are at a philosophical fork in the road, and that the direction they choose will reveal something fundamental about how the organization views its own future. The tension between Clark and head coach Stephanie White's basketball philosophy has been discussed publicly enough that it no longer qualifies as insider speculation. It is part of the documented public conversation about the Fever. Commentators have pointed specifically to bench rotation decisions, late-game management choices, and what several observers described as a coaching approach that did not fully commit to building the team's offensive system around Clark's specific strengths as a player. The Alyssa Thomas situation became a specific and well-documented flashpoint. Clark was on the receiving end of an on-court incident that generated significant public attention, and Stephanie White's public response in the aftermath was widely criticized as inadequate given the nature of what her star player experienced. White initially addressed it, then appeared to walk back elements of that response in a way that left many observers confused about where the coaching staff actually stood. For fans and analysts who had been watching the relationship between Clark and her coaching staff carefully, the handling of that situation felt like a crystallizing moment. White has also faced criticism for what some characterize as a pattern of passivity in publicly defending and advocating for Clark during moments of on-court conflict and off-court controversy. The argument being made is not that White dislikes Clark or is actively working against her, but that the coaching philosophy and the organizational culture around it have not been structured in a way that maximizes what Clark brings to the game and protects her in the moments when protection is clearly warranted. Clark has not spoken publicly about any desire to leave Indiana. She has not made statements suggesting dissatisfaction with the franchise in terms that would indicate a decision has been made. What she has done is compete at an extraordinary level while navigating an organizational environment that multiple outside observers have described as not ideally suited to her needs and abilities. Now place all of that against the backdrop of what is happening in Los Angeles, a new aggressive ownership group that has shown it is willing to make significant organizational changes quickly. A coaching staff under pressure to prove it belongs in the new vision. A roster that includes Cameron Brink, a genuine friend of Clark's who provides a real existing connection between the two franchises' social circles. a major market with resources and promotional infrastructure that most WNBA organizations simply cannot match. None of this confirms that Caitlin Clark is leaving Indiana. What it does is paint an accurate picture of why the speculation is not irrational, why the question is not going away, and why the Indiana Fever would be wise to take the circumstances surrounding their franchise player's situation with an urgency that matches the moment. The open question of where Clark plays beyond her current deal is the most significant contractual situation in the history of the WNBA, and it is genuinely unresolved. Pull back far enough in Sophie Cunningham's shoe, the Sparks' organizational shakeup, and the ongoing debate about Caitlin Clark's future all reveal themselves as different expressions of the same underlying transformation. The WNBA is in the middle of a commercial and cultural revolution, and the institutions, franchises, and individuals who understand what that revolution demands are pulling ahead of the ones who are still operating as though the old rules apply. The numbers tell the story clearly. Attendance records have been broken across multiple markets. Television ratings have climbed in ways that forced networks to restructure their coverage commitments. Shoe companies, which for most of the league's history treated WNBA athletes as afterthoughts in their broader marketing strategies, are now building player-exclusive colorways and investing in signature-level deals. Ownership groups connected to serious money and serious ambitions are entering the league and signaling immediately that they intend to compete aggressively in a way that previous ownership structures did not. The players who are winning in this new environment are not necessarily the ones with the best statistical profiles, though elite production still matters enormously. The players who are capturing the commercial and cultural moment are the ones who have built real, authentic identities that extend beyond the box score and connect with audiences that go beyond the traditional women's basketball fan base. Sophie Cunningham pointed for 22 seconds and became more famous than she had been in 6 previous professional seasons. Caitlin Clark transformed arena attendance records everywhere she played, not just in Indiana, but across the entire league as visiting crowds swelled to see her perform. That dynamic, where individual players have the ability to move markets and drive revenue in ways that were simply not possible a decade ago, has changed the relationship between athletes and franchises in the WNBA in ways that the league is still working out. Franchises that built their organizational cultures around a model where the institution held all the leverage and the players operated within whatever structure the coaching staff and front office designed are finding that model increasingly difficult to sustain when the athletes themselves have significant commercial value and genuinely portable audiences. The Indiana Fever built something extraordinary around Caitlin Clark's arrival, but the question hanging over the franchise is whether the organizational structure kept pace with what Clark's presence created. The attendance numbers, the television ratings, the merchandise sales, all of it exploded around Clark. The question analysts and commentators keep returning to is whether the coaching philosophy and front office decision-making adapted to match the scale of what they suddenly had. The LA Sparks represent the other side of this equation. They are a franchise that has the market, the resources, and now apparently the ownership urgency to build something significant, but that has not yet identified the central piece around which the new structure gets built. The organizational changes happening in Los Angeles right now look like preparation, the clearing away of what was not working to make space for whatever comes next. And Sophie Cunningham, sitting somewhere in the middle of all of this with her name on an Adidas shoe and 22 seconds of pointing footage that the entire internet could not stop watching, might be the most instructive example of how this new WNBA economy actually functions. She did not arrive with a 5-star recruiting profile. She did not get handed a signature shoe because of her career scoring average. She built an audience through 6 years of consistent, authentic, fiercely competitive professional basketball. And then she had one genuine moment of being exactly herself in front of the entire sports world. And the commercial machine responded to it, because the commercial machine in women's basketball is finally powerful enough to respond. The franchises, coaches, and executives who understand this shift and structure their organizations around it are going to define the league's next decade. The ones who do not are going to watch from the outside as the league grows past them. What this week in the WNBA actually revealed, underneath all the noise and the controversy and the speculation, is a league that has genuinely arrived at a new level of cultural and commercial significance, and is now working through all of the complicated growing pains that come with that arrival. Sophie Cunningham's shoe is not just a product. It is a document of how far women's basketball has traveled commercially in a very short period of time, and what is now possible for players who build authentic identities and genuine audiences in this league. The Sparks shakeup is not just a personnel move. It is a signal that serious money and serious ambition have entered the WNBA and are not willing to wait for organic progress when aggressive restructuring is available. And the Caitlin Clark question is not just about one player's contract. It is about whether the institutions that benefited most from the league's growth are equipped to sustain and protect what they built. The shoe drops July 24th. The Sparks are just getting started. And Caitlin Clark, whatever she decides and wherever she plays, has already changed women's basketball in ways that cannot be undone. The most interesting chapter of this league's history is not the one that just happened. It is the one being written right now, and it is worth paying very close attention.